Today we're going to be looking at intervals when they're written as music notes on a staff. Each interval number has its own particular appearance or look, regardless of the key signature, accidentals, or clef. A third always looks like a third, a second always looks like a second, a fifth always looks like a fifth, and so on and so on. Even though two intervals may look the same written out on staff paper, they might not necessarily sound the same. So first let's check out what each of these interval numbers look like visually on staff. And as you may or may not know, a note can either be written on a line or in a space. So first let's start with a unison. So a unison is always just going to be two notes that are either on the same line or the same space. See? If I were to play this unison interval, it would sound like this. E to E. It's the exact same E in the same octave, just played twice. This one right here, this is two A's. A and A. As you can see, they sound the same. So no matter where I write these two notes, it doesn't matter if I'm in bass clef or treble clef, if you ever see two notes that are either in the same space or the same line, that will always be some type of unison interval. Pretty straightforward. Now let's check out what a second looks like. So a second always has one note on a line and the other note in a space. And it doesn't matter if the note that's on a line is on the bottom or if the note that's on a space is on the bottom. You see how this one starts with a note on a line and then has a note on the space? But this one starts with a note in a space and then a note on a line. It doesn't matter, they're both seconds. So, no matter where I draw this little shape, or this look, these are always going to be some type of second. Now we haven't specified if it's a minor second or a major second or an augmented second. We're going to get into that later in the video. First, we're just checking out the look of each of these different interval numbers. So personally, I think seconds aren't too hard to recognize because, as I said, it's just always one note on a space and one on a line as close together as possible. Now let's check out what thirds look like. So a third either has two notes in spaces, like that, or two notes on lines, like that. And as you can see, they're always on the spaces right next to each other, or on the lines right next to each other. This wouldn't be a third, right? Because I have a space in between them. No. But this would be a third, right? Because they're both on spaces right next to each other. This would also be a third, because the notes are both on lines right next to each other. It also doesn't matter if the notes are above or below the staff as well, because we can continue drawing notes off the staff, right? I could do that as well. And see, this is also a third, even though it's off the staff. I could draw thirds like this. So there's a third, here's a third. I'm just moving up. Here's a third. See, they're both on lines, even though it's going off the staff. They're both on lines next to each other, right? Same here, they're both in spaces next to each other. Make sense? Here is also a third. They're both in spaces, and then this is the same one we have over here. These are all thirds. So personally, I think thirds are also pretty easy to recognize because they're just two notes, either both in spaces or both in lines, right next to each other. Now let's check out fourths. So fourths are a little bit trickier to recognize than a third, but not impossible. So with a fourth, one note is going to be on a line and the other is always on a space, just like that. We could start with the note on a space and then have the other note be on a line. See, again, it doesn't matter if the note that's on a line is on the bottom or on the top, they're still fourths. And as you can see, between the two notes in a fourth, we always have one line. I'm just drawing this in red so you can see it a bit better. And we also have a space. See? Again, here I have one line and also one space. So again, no matter where I draw them, these are always going to be fourths. Let's check these out. We have between them one line, right? And one space. See? One line and one space. And if you find it difficult to remember what a fourth looks like, you could always think of it as looking sort of like a third, where if we take one of these notes and just nudge them up a little bit, so then it becomes this. That's what a fourth looks like. So it sort of looks like a third with one note just moved a little bit further away. Cool? All right, now let's check out what a fifth looks like. So a fifth either has both notes on lines or both notes on spaces, like that. And if they're both on lines, we have one line between them, and if they're both on spaces, we have one space between them. Now visually, I think that fifths are also pretty easy to recognize, just like thirds. You know, this would be a fifth, this would be a fifth, this would also be a fifth. Since they're both always going to be on lines or both always going to be in spaces, they're sort of visually pleasing to look at and sort of easy to recognize. You know, either both on spaces with a space between, or both on lines with a line between. Again, we could draw one off the staff as well. For instance, here to here. That's a fifth too. Now let's check out a sixth. So a sixth has one note on a line and one note on a space. Or we could have one note on a space and one note on a line. And a sixth always has two lines and two spaces between the two notes. Cool? Let's check this one out. See, we have two lines between them and we have two spaces. Now sixths are a little trickier to recognize than the fifths because one's on a space and one's on a line, so it's a little more difficult, right? But again, not too hard. And again, just like with all these, it doesn't matter if we're in treble clef or bass clef. They always look the same. A sixth is always going to look like this. Now let's look at a seventh. So with a seventh, either both notes are going to be on lines or both notes are going to be in spaces. And if they're both on lines, then they have two lines between them. And if they're both in spaces, then they have two spaces between them. So sevenths are also nice and visually pleasing to look at. I could draw them anywhere, right? Always going to have that same look, no matter where the two notes are on the staff. The seventh distance will always be the same. And last but not least, we have our octave. So with an octave, one note will always be on a line, while the other one is always on a space. Or vice versa, one's on a space, while the other is on a line. And I personally think the octaves are a little bit trickier to recognize than the sevenths because one's on a line and one's on a space. But if we look closely, with an octave, we have three lines between the notes, right? And we have three spaces. Here's the first space, here's the second space, and here is the third space. Cool. Here again, let's check this one out. We have three lines between the two notes, and we have three spaces. So I think the easiest intervals to recognize are unisons, which look like this, right? Seconds, which look like this, or like this. Thirds, which look like this, or like this. Fifths, which look like this, or like this. And sevenths, which look like this, or like this. So I think these are the easiest ones to recognize visually. The trickiest ones are the fourths, the sixths, and the octaves. And you could imagine a fourth as being somewhere in between a third and a fifth, and a sixth as being somewhere between a fifth and a seventh, and an octave being a little bit bigger than a seventh. And another way to think about these trickier ones is that a fourth always has one line and one space between it, right? One line and one space. A sixth always has two lines and two spaces between the two notes, see? Two lines and two spaces, see? And an octave always has three lines, 1, 2, 3, and three spaces. 1, 2, 3. Again, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So that's another way you can think about these trickier ones. One line and one space, two lines, two spaces, and three lines and three spaces. Now I have some worksheets that can help you practice and drill memorizing and recognizing these different interval shapes and just the way they look when they're written out on a staff. And I have a link to those worksheets as well as many other music theory worksheets in a link in the description below. They're all printable PDFs and I think they will really help drill and practice everything we're going over today. Also, if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please do. I post one video a week and I would love to have you on board. And if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and leave a comment. All right, let's keep going. Now, this video is technically the fourth video in a series I have made about intervals, and I do strongly encourage you to check out those videos if anything becomes confusing during the rest of this video. I will put links to them in the description below. If you remember from my earlier videos, we talked about interval qualities and interval numbers. And so the interval quality is that adjective that goes at the beginning of the interval name. For instance, the name a minor sixth, right? The quality is minor and the number is sixth, right? With an augmented fourth. Augmented is the quality and fourth is the number. And so with each of these interval looks that we were just sort of going over when notes are written out on staff, these are just telling us what the interval number is. It's very interesting that a fourth always looks like a fourth and a sixth always looks like a sixth. That's cool and nice and easy, but there's a little bit more to intervals than just the interval number, right? The interval quality is a very important part of the interval name because a minor sixth sounds very different from a major sixth. I'll show you. Here's what a major sixth sounds like, and here's what a minor sixth sounds like. Ooh. So check it out. So even though these are both sixths, this would be my major sixth, and this would be my minor sixth. See, I'm playing C to A, that's my major sixth. And then C to A flat, that's my minor sixth. So even though they're both sixes, remember I said the interval number always looks the same, right? Even if I erase this flat, that you can see they have the exact same distance apart on the staff, right? Just one of these has a flat in front of it. So even though they look pretty much the same except for that flat, they sound different from each other and they have different interval qualities. Let me show you something else. So the first interval I'm going to draw is G to F, okay? And so do you remember what interval number that is? Just based on the look. So they're both on lines, right? So it's going to be one of those odd intervals, right? It's going to be a third, fifth, or seventh because they're both on lines. And we've got two lines between them. So this is a seventh, okay? So we know it's a seventh, but hey, what kind of seventh is it? Is it a major or is it a minor seventh? Well, I know that a G to an F happens to be a minor seventh, okay? And a major seventh is G to F sharp. Why do I know this? Well, because in the key of G major, let's look at a G major scale, G, A, B, C, D, E, and F sharp. F sharp is the note in our G major scale, or in our G major key signature. So G to F sharp is sort of like the default settings for a major seventh. But if we were to alter it slightly, and it becomes G to F, then we go from having a major seventh to a minor seventh. If that confuses you at all, please, please, please go watch my other interval videos, particularly videos 2 and 3, because I break this down much more slowly, and I think if you watch those, you'll definitely understand what I'm talking about then. So that's all for today. Again, if you want to practice looking at these intervals on staff paper and recognizing them, I have printable PDF worksheets that you can download and link in the description below. Please watch the rest of my interval series videos if you haven't yet, and I will be posting other videos in this interval series as well after this, because there's so much to talk about when it comes to intervals. If you've watched this video all the way through and you still haven't subscribed, please do. I post one video a week, and I would love to have you here. And if you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and leave a comment to say hey. So that's all for today. Thank you guys again so much for watching. Stay tuned for next week's lesson, and have a wonderful rest of